Hi, my name is Betsy Kellums. I'm the City of Greeley Historic Preservation Planner, and I would like to welcome you on our virtual walking tour of the Cranford neighborhood. Cranford is one of Greeley's coolest historic neighborhoods. It is one of the premier historic neighborhoods, and I look forward to talking with you about history and architecture in the area. John P. and Jane Sarah Cranford were the property owners who platted this neighborhood in the late 1880s. They replatted it several times over the course of the years. The area stretches from 13th Street to 20th Street and 10th Avenue to 14th Avenue. They were original investors in the Union Colony, and the land was purchased in 1872 in Jane's name. John was the head of Cranford and Valentine, a successful contracting firm in the asphalt paving industry. They donated over 20 acres of their land to the State Normal School in 1889. Now, the State Normal School opened in 1890, and the student population grew steadily from 1890 through 1925 to 1930. There was a 158% increase in the number of students between 1917 and 1927, partially due to the end of World War I. This growth of the college influenced the development of the surrounding neighborhood. Many rental properties were created to provide housing for off-campus housing. The State College set standards for rentals so they would be safe for students, and many of the homes in this neighborhood were built with basements to provide for student housing. Between 1900 and 1910, almost 70 houses were built. Most of them were American Foursquare type houses, and in the 1910s to 1920s, craftsman-style bungalows were very popular. By the end of the 1930s, there were over 150 craftsman bungalows in the Cranford neighborhood. They emphasized simplicity, durability, and harmony with natural surroundings and an economy of space and material. The 1920s in Greeley experienced a building boom. 133 houses were built in the Cranford neighborhood just between 1920 and 1929. 1920s saw Tudor Revival style enter the neighborhood, and by 1930 there were a dozen that had been built. In 1930, nearly 80% of the lots held houses. After the Great Depression, Tudor style was the most popular, with 24 more built between the 1930s and 1940s, especially between 1937 and 1941. By 1950, more than 90% of the neighborhood had been developed, with ranch style becoming popular, although there were not very many ranch style houses being built in this neighborhood. People who lived in the neighborhood were staff at the university, farmers, retirees, and many other positions. And by 1938, the workforce was more diversified. Government, automotive, police officers, and postmasters also lived here. And that's a brief introduction to the Cranford neighborhood. Let's get walking. And here we are at the Bliss House. This was built in approximately 1926 for Walter and Artie Bliss. They came to Greeley in 1910, and Walter was a prominent attorney. He was the county attorney from 1913 until approximately 1921. And then later he served as the Greeley city attorney from 1929 to 1931. He was a Greeley school board member and the director of the Well County Savings Bank for 15 years. By 1942, John and Helen Stevenson owned this house. Helen graduated from the State Normal School and attended the Columbia University School of Journalism and was a newspaper reporter and editor in New York. She became the CEO and vice president of Well County Abstract and Investment Company. They returned to New York in 1951. From 1948 to 1950 approximately, Dr. Roy and Pauline Swanson, sometime during that time, they purchased the house. They lived here until about 1963. She was a dietitian at NCMC, North Colorado Medical Center, after Roy retired in 1962. They were members of several organizations and were active with the Greeley Philharmonic Orchestra. This is an excellent example of a colonial revival style house with a centered entrance and side lights, a one-story partial width front porch with square fluted columns, a balustrade rail on top, and the windows are wood-framed 1/1 double-hung sash windows with brick sills and lintels, and several picture windows with transoms. There's 2 brick chimneys on the south wall and north end of the roof ridge. There's a 1-story, 1-room on the south with a flat roof and metal balustrade rail. And this was the Bliss Thompson house, one of my personal favorites. I especially like the symmetry and the use of 2 colors of brick that contrast with each other. And now we'll move on to the next site. And here we are at our next stop, the Jacobs-Nixon house at 1631 11th Avenue. James L. Bartlett likely built this house. He lived in the house until around 1910 with his wife Grace. He was the secretary and manager of Bartlett Lumber Company. In 1912, John T. Jacobs purchased the house and moved in with his wife Alice Nixon Jacobs. He came to Greeley in 1887 and married her in 1893. He was an attorney with his office in the Coronado building, which he built and owned. He earned his law degree at CU Boulder and served as a county judge from 1899 to 1902. He practiced irrigation law and helped push for the courthouse building to be built as well as the Greeley High School building. His wife Alice was first in her graduating class at Colorado State Normal School, was in the first graduating class at Colorado State Normal School, and was the youngest at age 16. She came to Greeley in a covered wagon with her family and was a member of the Pioneer Society, as well as a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution. She lived in the house until John's death in 1939 and continued to live here until 1945. She deeded the house to her son. In 1945, Ralph and Flora Knopfsinger bought the house. They had moved to Greeley in 1929, and he was a partner in NLN Manufacturing Company with his brother and with George Lustele. It became the Knopfsinger Manufacturing Company. In 1957, the Pillar of Fire Church bought the house and used it as a residence through 1990, when Jessie Jacobs, the granddaughter of John T. Jacobs and Alice Jacobs, purchased the house. This is an example of a 4-square with craftsman-style features. It was built in 1906, has narrow wood lap siding, and river rock covers the foundation. Has a centered entrance with side lights, a 1-story covered entrance with triangular brackets, and a metal balustrade rail. The porch on the south side has river cobble wall, flat roof, wood frame roof covers the river cobble porch. And there's a river cobble chimney on the south wall. And that's the Jacobs-Nixon house. Let's move on to the next site. Welcome to the Baldwin House. This house is individually designated on the Greeley Historic Register. It was built in approximately 1913. Carolyn Baldwin had purchased the property in 1910 and then had the house built in 1913. By 1916, W.E. Freeman, who was a banker and rancher, had purchased the house. He had a bank in Briggsdale which dissolved in 1937. In 1924, James R. McClelland lived here. He was the assistant cashier at the Union National Bank. And by 1930, Harry Hibbs, of Hibbs Clothing Company fame, was living here. He sold the house to an employee, Herman T. Eyes, who lived there until 1941. In 1941, Wendell K. and Ruth M. Beard lived here. He was on the faculty of Greeley High School as a vocational counselor and principal. In 1954, Theo and Hope Tegman lived here. He was the deputy sheriff of Weld County, and they lived in the home until 1957. This is an example of a craftsman-style bungalow. It is a 1-story wood frame house with a hipped roof with decorative exposed rafter ends. I encourage you to look more closely when you walk by. There's 2 hipped roof extensions and a concrete foundation with stucco and lapped wood siding. The 1-story full-width front porch has exposed rafter ends with the principal roof extending over the porch and 4 wood columns. There's a brick chimney in the rear. And let's go on to the next site. Welcome to the Apple House. This house was the home of Frank and May Potts as the first owners. They married in Burlington Junction, Missouri in 1904 and moved to Greeley in 1921. He worked as a cattle feeder and a carpenter and built houses in Greeley. In 1931, Clay and Ruth Apple lived in this house. He was an attorney who joined the Marine Corps in 1917 and served in World War I. He met Ruth in college. She had a BA from McKendree College in Illinois and a master's in arts from George Peabody College in Nashville. She taught high school English in Illinois and Virginia. In 1920, Clay started law school at CU Boulder. They married in 1922 in Metropolis, Illinois, and moved to Greeley in 1923. For 2 years, they lived in D.C. during World War II while working in the Claims Department of the Department of Justice. He represented the U.S. against Antarctic explorer Admiral Byrd, who lost his case. He was a Weld County attorney from 1934 to 1940 and was hired by the Mountain States Beet Growers Association and National Beet Growers Association to file a brief with the Supreme Court in 1936. The court declared the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933 unconstitutional. He was members of various organizations. Ruth died in 1985 and Clay moved to California to live with his daughter. He passed away in 1988. This is an excellent example of a craftsman-style bungalow built in 1928. This example has a red and sand-colored brick exterior, and the use of those two colors of brick is a prominent feature on the house. There's brick coining at the exterior wall junctions, and gable features stucco with faux half-timbering. The roof has exposed rafter beams and wide overhanging eaves, and there's an open partial width porch on the right side of the main facade with brick walls and columns. There's two brick chimneys, one with a red sand brick and one with larger gable end features, red brick with contrasting sand-colored brick with a diamond pattern on the main level. And that's the Apple House. Let's move on to the next site. And here we are at the Neal House. This was the home of Lloyd and Margaret Sanford Neal in 1923. They got married in 1920. He was the secretary of the Neal Lumber Company. He moved to Greeley when he was under 2 years old. He graduated from high school in Greeley in 1905 and played basketball. He attended Denver University from 1905 to 1909, where he also played basketball. He managed a semi-pro basketball team in Greeley called the Greeley Arrows. Margaret grew up near Platteville and was a concert singer. In 1929, Lloyd sold the lumber business to his partner, William Nagel, and they moved to California. In 1929, William and Winifred Saunders lived here, and he was the athletic coach at the Colorado Teachers College. By 1933, Otto and Julia Edwards lived here. They had moved to Greeley in 1919. He worked as the manager of J.C. Penney's from 1929 to 1938. He purchased Galland Chevrolet and renamed it Edwards Chevrolet. He also was proprietor of Modern Living Appliances and was president of the Greeley Chamber of Commerce. Julia, his wife, taught school, was a member of the Greeley Country Club and the American Association of University Women. In 1948, Lacey and Mary Wilkinson lived in this house. Lacey was a prominent local, state, and federal official, businessman, and politician. He owned McVeigh Printery, also known as Wilkinson Printery, and he served 3 terms as Greeley mayor. Mary was in the Salvation Army Band, the United Nations Association of Weld County, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and the Colorado State College Alumni Association. By 1968, Dr. John and Judith Watt lived here, and he was a surgeon who helped found the medical group of Greeley. This house is an example of Tudor Revival style. This is a unique example of Tudor Revival with the stucco exterior and red brick decorative features. There are 6/6 sash windows in the front gable, and this is a good example of this style. And now let's move on to the next site, across the street. And here we are at the Borg House. This house was built in 1926 and was the home of Charles B. and May Larman. They were the original owners. They owned and operated the Red Star Medical Company from 1928 to 1930, and he was also proprietor of Home Health Service Incorporated. From 1936 on, for quite a few years, Roy and Pearl Utter lived here. They owned and operated the Utter Jewelry Company. They lived here in the house together until 1968 when Roy died, and then Pearl lived here until 1970. They rented the house that is at the back of the property. He was president of the Weld County Credit Association and director of the Chamber of Commerce. They married in 1911 in Nelson, Nebraska, and came to Greeley in 1932. Several other people occupied this house until 1978, when the more recent owners, Andrew and Mary Borg, moved in. Mary was a professor at UNC. This is an example of a colonial revival style house. It has a one-story porch with the curved roof and square columns, and 6/1 wood frame double hung sash windows with decorative brickwork in the arches above. The first story windows have brick row lock sills. The hipped roof dormer has wide overhanging open eaves. The centered entrance is a characteristic feature, and their 2 brick chimneys have brick corbelling at the top. This was the Borg house, one that I find particularly interesting with these various architectural features. Now let's go next door, on to the next stop. Hi, we're here at the Lim House, built in 1928. This was the home of John W. Reed Jr. and his wife Julia. They owned Reed's Shoe Store and were part of Connecticut Mutual Life Insurance Company. They retired in 1956. He was a Rotary member and president of Rotary and served several terms as the city treasurer. He was chapter manager of the Weld County Red Cross as well. In 1940, Donald and Jessie MacArthur lived here. He was a co-proprietor of the Weld County Garage. From 1944 to 1948, Rex C. Eaton Sr. lived here. He was the owner of Eaton Investment Company. Then Edward Gale and Ruth MacArthur lived here. They operated the Weld County Garage. Becky and Meng Lim lived here from 1986 until she passed away in 2007, and then later he passed away. She had been born in Malaysia in 1940 and lived in England until 1959, when she moved to Greeley in 1982. This is an example of Tudor Revival style architecture. This is a very good example. It has many of the characteristic features, including the steeply pitched roof, the fact that it's brick. The weeping mortar is a very unique characteristic on this particular house. The dormers, which are the portions that extend out from the roof, with the fake half timbering. The concrete foundation with a brick veneer. The stone trim on portions of the exterior, and the multiple front gables. The 2 brick chimneys are especially characteristic with the brick corbelling, and the decorative arch with decorative brickwork alternating in stretcher and soldier courses forming a grid pattern. The porte cochere with the steeply pitched roof marks a transition from detached garages to attached garages. This was the Lim House. I find that the corbelling on the chimneys, the weeping mortar, and the porte cochere are pretty cool features on this house. Let's stroll around the corner to the next stop. And here we have one of Greeley's more interesting houses. This is the Hereford House. This was designed by Sidney Fraser, a prominent Greeley architect who also designed the Greeley Tribune building. He worked on the Armory and other prominent buildings in Greeley. He designed it for Alma Hereford, who was a widow who owned the toggery shop. She lived here until her death in 1965. He designed it as a duplex, and the other occupant was her sister, Marjorie Mackenzie. She worked at the Greeley Laundry and lived here until her death in 1979. This is an example of Art Moderne style of architecture. This is a 1-story flat-roofed house, which I've always thought was interesting in Colorado to have a flat-roofed house. This has an asymmetrical facade that contains an off-centered recessed entry with brick steps, a concrete canopy over the entrance, And you'll notice the rounded corners in some places, and then the very sharp cornered window that wraps around the corner. Those are some of the main features of Art Moderne style of architecture, which primarily was built in the 1930s. There was also a one-story addition designed and built by Sidney Fraser on the west side of the house. And this concludes the Hereford House. That concludes our walking tour of the Cranford neighborhood. Thanks for joining me. If you would like more information about historic preservation in Greeley, please visit www.greeleygov.com/HP or give me a call in the Historic Preservation Office at 970-350-9222 or send me an email. Thanks very much for joining us.